So my name is Erin Hurley, and I'm the former president of CATR, one of the co-hosts of this conference, Partition Ensemble. And I am here in conversation for this plenary session with Leslie Baker. Maybe could you, there we go. Thank you for the visual cue. A choreographer, dancer, performance artist, theater artist, working now in Montreal, but with a long history of practice in Europe and the States as well. Also here with Emma Tibaldo. Thanks, Emma. Who is a dramaturg and performer and writer, and also is the artistic and executive director of Playwrights Workshop Montreal. And Joseph Schrag. Thanks, Joseph, who is a playwright and a co-founder of Scapegoat Carnival Theatre here in Montreal. And they're all members of an ensemble called The Bakery, after Leslie's last name, which I think is very clever. And so we're here today to talk a little bit about the bakery, about its history of practice, and about its methods of working. How does it bring together different sort of artistic disciplines under the big tent of contemporary theater to produce shows, let's call them, that bridge in some ways dance and theater, movement, image and text and sound, and are trying to articulate processes around those movements in the process of making and in the productions themselves. So maybe we could begin by you telling us a bit about the bakery and its aims and why you three came together in this collective.
Okay. Well, the bakery, we were formalized in 2016, and it was really a practical response to needing to have a company name and a nonprofit number, but it also felt it was a wonderful, important step, I think, in the history of the work. And at that time, Joseph and Emma and I had been working together through exploring viewpoints and other practices. And so the bakery itself is a formal marking in the trajectory of a period of work. We're interested in exploring questions around what are ways of putting together performance, what is a way of being an ensemble, and also trying to examine that within the contemporary context of performance and in the digital era and in different ways of sharing and creating work. Yeah.
I mean, I'm a director, that's my training, and a dramaturg. And so coming to this practice was about fulfilling my need as a performer and reconnecting to performance and the idea of movement. I had been training in Butoh and so on, but I never formally trained in viewpointing. So Leslie kind of opened up this whole world of how to create differently. So for me, that was my into the work, and that was my into the company, which formalized at a point when I was part of the viewpointing ensemble, which was a training process.
Joseph, do you want to talk
Sure.
about we can talk about whatever you like, but would you like to speak to your part in this group, your role, or how you come to this kind of alternate or alternative storytelling structure as a playwright?
Well, it's sort of funny. In 2004, I was workshopping a piece of Playwrights Workshop Montreal, and Emma was at a certain point like, "What are you really interested in?" And I said, "Oh, I'm really interested in Robert Wilson and theater of images, and she said, "Oh, you should go do this workshop that Leslie Baker is doing." And that was how I met Leslie, doing viewpointing, and then I became her sort of assistant, a bit of everything, assistant dramaturg, assistant stage manager. And I feel like there was kind of a long period of, or maybe even an ongoing period of apprenticeship in a sense. And at a certain point, writing became part of it. And Leslie said, "What would you actually try to write the text for this piece?" And yeah, so I'm a writer, and that's my background. And yeah, I spend time more on the text side, I guess, but I also participate in the training. And
Okay.
yeah.
Do you want to talk about, any of you, about just to work with the bakery metaphor, what it is that you're baking? Like what ingredients do you bring? What kind? I mean, so one of the things that you're baking, it sounds like from what Emma just said, is a process, and an articulated process for creating original work, right? In light of, as Leslie points to, a contemporary moment, digital capacities, right, and environments. You know, sound is really important, has been really important in your creative process as well, in addition to movement, text, and image, all within this viewpoints. Well, is it all within this viewpoints structure?
The wonderful thing about viewpoints, one wonderful thing is that it introduced me to the idea of a non-hierarchical way of constructing work, that, you know, Mary put story and emotion as equally important as movement, shape, space, time. I think aesthetically, as a young artist, it opened my mind to the possibility of other ways of telling story than the beautiful option of a narrative text, a dramatic text.
Mm-hmm.
And I think just happens to be that my affinity is towards poetic works. Yeah.
So you've highlighted so far sort of the openness of the work, both in terms of what it sparks imaginatively. You've talked about your affinity for poetic work, right? And also the multiple actors in this process, right? So people come and go as part of that training process, which ultimately becomes then a creative and a building process toward a production in the end. And so I'm wondering, can you tell us about what sort of rules or conventions then guide that process, which is, you know, multifactorial and open and not linear necessarily? Do you see what I mean? So can you tell us what guides your choices, your practices, what comes into the work?
There's kind of been 3 phases of processes. So the first one was based on play text.
Mm-hmm.
So I would select pieces from a play, scenes from a play that I was interested in. And then I'd work with the performers and talk about what was interesting in the scene, the play. And then they'd go into a viewpoints improvisation. Mm-hmm. Based on that content. So, and we're still doing this with Skin, putting content then into what we could call a viewpoints improv. Coupled with that is this more physical, I should say more of a Grotowski rooted, history, mm-hmm. As a performance style.
Okay.
Did a version of Three Sisters with that process, and Joseph worked with me on that. And he would take the scenes and then create text, kind of a contemporary text inspired by Three Sisters. And then there was I'd say a middle section where I was, for lack of inspiration, but wanting to create, I found gestures, used a chance technique and applied them to a musical score. But I did 2 productions with this, and then based the whole performance on the musical score.
Okay.
The blocking, the length of time a gesture is done, the timing, everything. And then we moved into like what I'd think of as a third phase, is creating from a source of inspiration. And that's how Perv started, and I'd say where Skin comes from. And in that process, it's a combination of using visuals, sounds, physicality, text, and a writing on our feet.
So this seems like a good moment for you to tell us more about Skin, sort of concretely in terms of how do you envision it, right? What it is, what's its history, what are the themes that you're working from? So what was the inspiration, Leslie, to use your word from earlier, that sparked this process, which is becoming a piece?
If I remember correctly, Emma, we both kind of had some ideas that we were interested in. I had been inspired by a photograph of an illuminated doorway.
I was inspired by the insignificance of human existence in terms of the universe. Leslie's looking at doorways and I'm looking at the universe, and of course those 2 things are connected very closely in terms of the lens through which we see the world or see our lives. And and my father was also getting really old at the time, so his world was, well, he still is getting very old. His world was shrinking. And the idea of what is a life again was in there, and that's something that Leslie's very interested in, and I believe Joseph as well.
So the global theme was boundaries and borders, and then I became interested in boundaries and boundaries around styles of performance.
Okay.
And was inspired for a 5-part structure, and each section could be thematically related, but maybe stylistically and story-wise completely different.
Joseph, was there anything you wanted to add about Skin? What's your point of entry into Skin?
I started, generating text. In the beginning, it was little fragments about the levels of atmosphere, so like the exosphere and, oh my God, I can never get in my head the other one. And then the idea of introversion, extroversion came up. Okay. And so Leslie had this idea of people who want to make a plan to go see the auroras and they can't leave their houses. And so this sort of evolved into the first section, which is about, we call them shut-ins. So it's almost like you have a person who's a bit outside of these 3 people talking about them, and they'll go off into almost aphorisms about shut-ins in this kind of abstract way. Some of them are jokes, some of them are very insensitive, some of them there's an identification with the subjects and the inability to cross a threshold. So that's was a big chunk of text. And then the other part was this essay on the shortness of life by Seneca that Leslie felt kind of resonated with the theme. So we spent a while reading the essay and talking about it, and then excerpting this character that, at least back then, we thought of almost as a preacher or something, who was giving this sort of very tough-minded Stoic philosophy.
So what I'm hearing then is, if Skin starts with these various sources of inspiration, then Joseph, are the texts that you're generating or introducing in the case of Seneca, but also your own texts, do those then become, are those the content, or what Leslie you referred to earlier as the content from which then improvisations using viewpoints can happen? And then within the broader structure, which this time, instead of being a musical score, is that 5-part structure where each part has a distinct style of performance.
Well, I think that for me, the text is more a reaction to the physical dramaturgy and visual dramaturgy that we go through.
Also, I guess because everything's so fragmentary, it's like text might be one moment next to something gestural or sound, or it's like this, it's part of the score to evolve. It doesn't really, it actually never predicts. Like I learned very early on, there's no reason for a stage direction, you know? So it's like, you're really fitting it in, you're fitting all these pieces together, and it's not necessarily that one piece is more important than the other.
I was going to say, ultimately, the pieces are hang together or structured, scored by calling things a series of moments that are then linked. And then we shift. Okay, let's try this series. No, that didn't work. Let's try this here. And that's part of the working on our feet.
Maybe this is a good moment to show a bit of skin, and then we can go back in and talk about the techniques that are coming together that you're experimenting with in the piece.
Sure, I'll get that set up.
I'll tell you, being a shut-in isn't about the inability to cross a threshold. It's not like a test pilot traversing the Kármán line.
You know, there's periods of experimentation with designers. So giving the space for designers to come into the work and being able to think about it conceptually and make offers, actually have the time to make an offer and then look at it and then see how it works inside the telling of that story.
I mean, in a way, it's hugely co-creative. Near the end, then I'd say I shift into more of a directorial role and start doing the editing or this or timing or things like that. And then people fight me on it, and then we fight, and then, you know, in a really polite and passive way. Because I think that if there's one conjoining thing, it's like the shyest, quietest rehearsal process ever, outside of when we're in these loud gestures. But unconscious at certain levels that then becomes more conscious. That's what I've really enjoyed lately, is following impulse, following image, and then seeing what it brings.
I think it's a continuous sort of breathing mechanism where we're all feeding in, then it gets then it does get filtered through the through Leslie, and then is given back, and then it breathes out again.
Joseph, that captures your sense too?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like people are there to be part of, you know, Leslie's vision, and everyone's trying to understand and support. And yeah, it's not people always say like, there's not really a democracy. It's like, since you don't really crave democracy in that way, and it's you know, it's an ensemble. I see part of it as an ensemble work where you show up and say yes and make offers, and then part of it where you're kind of left with your little job to, you know, hope that works, but we'll work through it together and make changes.
Well, good. Thank you so much for doing this. I too am very grateful for this conversation.
So much.
Yeah.
It's a pleasure.